The gunshot echoed through the dusty valley like thunder, sending a flock of startled ravens into the crimson sky. Colton O'Malley tightened his grip on the reins as his stallion reared, nostrils flaring at the acrid smell of gunpowder that hung in the evening air. Someone was in trouble, and in these parts, trouble usually meant death. It was 1876, and the promise of gold and land had drawn both the desperate and the ambitious to the Dakota Territory. Colton had come west 5 years ago after the war, carrying nothing but haunted memories and the skills of a sharpshooter. Now, at 32, he'd built a modest cattle ranch just outside of Broken Ridge, a town barely worthy of its place on any map. The second gunshot propelled him into action. He dug his heels into Thunder's sides, and the black stallion bolted toward the source of the commotion. As he crested the hill, the scene before him made his blood run cold. A stagecoach lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily. The driver was slumped over, motionless. 3 riders circled the wreckage like vultures, while a fourth was dragging a woman from the overturned vehicle. Her screams carried across the distance, igniting something primal in Colton's chest. "Come on, Thunder," he whispered, drawing his Winchester rifle from its scabbard. He guided his horse down the slope, using the cover of juniper and sage to approach undetected. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting long shadows across the plains. Dusk the most dangerous time in these lawless territories. The woman's copper hair caught the dying sunlight as she fought against her captor. Even from this distance, Colton could see she was a fighter. Something about her determination stirred a forgotten feeling in him. Just take the strongbox and leave the lady be. The wounded guard's voice carried faintly on the wind. One of the bandits laughed. "This one'll fetch more than what's in your box, old man. The boys at Rattlesnake Gulch pay good money for pretty company." Colton had heard enough. He dismounted quietly, patting Thunder's neck before advancing on foot. Years of hunting had taught him patience and stealth. He moved from shadow to shadow, closing the distance until he was within earshot. The woman, slender but strong, landed a solid kick to her captor's shin. "Unhand me, you filthy brute." Her accent was refined Eastern, definitely not from these parts. The bandit struck her across the face, and Colton felt rage bubble up inside him. "Feisty ones always bring the highest price," the bandit sneered. "Check the other passenger," ordered a man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. "Make it quick. We need to be gone before any patrols come through." Colton readied his rifle but hesitated. 4 against 1 weren't favorable odds, but he couldn't stand by and watch them take the woman. He could shoot 2, maybe 3 before they returned fire, but that still left the woman vulnerable. An old strategy from his cavalry days came to mind. Create confusion, divide attention, then strike. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of cartridges. With practiced precision, he threw them into a nearby thicket of dry brush and fired a single shot. The cartridges exploded in the brush like firecrackers, making it sound as if multiple shooters were opening fire. The bandits whirled toward the noise, giving Colton the distraction he needed. He sprinted to a boulder 20 yards from the stagecoach, took aim, and fired. The bandit nearest the woman fell with a cry, clutching his shoulder. The others scrambled for cover, returning fire wildly toward the brush where they thought the attack originated. "Run!" Colton shouted to the woman. "This way." She didn't hesitate. Gathering her torn skirts, she bolted toward his position as he provided covering fire. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, striking green against the backdrop of gathering dusk before she dove behind the boulder beside him. "Are you hit?" he asked, reloading swiftly. "No," she panted, her chest heaving with exertion and fear. But they killed Mr. Peterson, the driver, and Mr. Collins is badly wounded. I'm Colton O'Malley." He fired again, keeping the bandits pinned down. Faith Caldwell. She tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it around a cut on her arm. "I was traveling to Silver Creek to take a position as the new schoolteacher." Another volley of shots peppered their shelter, sending rock fragments flying. "There's only one shooter," the scarred bandit shouted. "Flank him, Dixon," Colton cursed under his breath. "My horse is just over that ridge. When I give the word, run for it. I'll cover you." Faith shook her head. "I won't leave the guard. He's still alive." Colton admired her courage but knew they were running out of options. "Miss Caldwell, it's Faith," she interrupted. "And I'm not abandoning a wounded man to those animals." Before he could argue further, hoofbeats thundered behind them. Colton spun, rifle ready, but lowered it when he recognized the riders' 3 men from neighboring ranches who must have heard the gunfire. "O'Malley," shouted Samuel Wilson, a grizzled rancher who'd fought in the Mexican War. "You all right, son?" "Got bandits hitting the stagecoach," Colton called back. 4 of them. One's wounded." The reinforcements spread out, rifles at the ready. The tide had turned and the bandits knew it. They mounted their horses and fled, firing a few parting shots before disappearing into the gathering darkness. "After them," Wilson shouted, but Colton raised a hand. "Let them go. We've got wounded to tend to." Faith was already rushing toward the stagecoach, heedless of danger. Colton followed, keeping his rifle ready in case the bandits circled back. Mr. Collins, the guard, was alive but badly wounded. A bullet lodged in his thigh. Faith had torn more strips from her petticoat and was applying pressure to the wound. "He needs a doctor," she said, her hands steady despite the blood. "Broken Ridge is closest, but it's still 10 miles, Colton replied. "Samuel, can you and your boys fashion a travois? We need to move him carefully." As the men worked, Colton helped Faith out of the overturned stagecoach, retrieving her valise and a small wooden box she insisted was important. The dying light caught her features' high cheekbones, a determined chin, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to shift colors like prairie grass in the wind. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" he asked, noticing how she favored her right side. "Just bruised," she replied, but winced when she tried to lift her bag. "Here, let me." He took her valise, surprised by its weight. "What's in here? Rocks?" A small smile broke through her worry. "Books, a teacher's most valuable possession." Within half an hour, they had created a makeshift stretcher for Mr. Collins and recovered what they could from the stagecoach, including the strongbox the bandits had been after. "The horses scattered," Wilson reported, "but we found one dead by the road. Looks like the bandits shot it to stop the coach." "Miss Caldwell will ride with me," Colton decided. "Mr. Collins needs to be transported as smoothly as possible." Faith nodded her agreement, though Colton noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as she approached Thunder. The massive black stallion eyed her warily. "He's more gentle than he looks," Colton assured her, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. The proximity was immediate and unsettling. Her back pressed against his chest, the scent of lavender and vanilla mingling with the dust and gunpowder that clung to them both. Colton tried to maintain a respectable distance, but the saddle allowed little room for propriety. As they began the journey to Broken Ridge, the last light faded from the sky, revealing a tapestry of stars. Faith remained silent for the first mile, her posture rigid with either pain or discomfort at their arrangement. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice soft against the rhythm of hooves. "For saving my life." Colton adjusted his hat, suddenly self-conscious. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she replied firmly. "Most would have ridden past or waited until the danger cleared. You didn't." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he changed the subject. What brings a lady like you to these parts? Teaching positions aren't exactly abundant in the territory. Faith was quiet for a moment. My father passed away last winter. There wasn't much left after his debts were settled. I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Silver Creek and took a chance. I'm sorry about your father, Colton said, genuine sympathy in his voice. He was a professor at a small college in Massachusetts. He taught me everything I know about literature, mathematics, even some Latin. Pride tinged her voice, but he was terrible with money and worse with horses. Colton chuckled. That's an unfortunate combination out here, indeed. She relaxed slightly against him. And what of you, Mr. O'Malley? You don't strike me as someone born to the saddle. He was surprised by her perception. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Joined the Union Army when I was 18. After the war, there wasn't much to go back to, so I headed west. A common story these days, she observed. Common enough, he agreed. Started with a small plot and 10 head of cattle. Now I've got 150 acres and 40 head. Not rich by any measure, but it's mine. They lapsed into comfortable silence as the prairie stretched before them, bathed in silver moonlight. Mr. Collins groaned occasionally as the travois bumped over the uneven ground, but Faith had done a good job bandaging his wound, and the bleeding had slowed. When the lights of Broken Ridge finally appeared in the distance, Colton felt Faith sag with exhaustion against him. Without thinking, he wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. Almost there, he murmured. She didn't pull away from his support. I've never been so happy to see a town, no matter how small. Broken Ridge consisted of one main street with the essential businesses: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a livery, and thankfully, a doctor's office. Despite the late hour, lights still burned in several windows, and their approach drew curious onlookers. Dr. Martin, a Civil War surgeon who'd come west for his health, met them at his door. "What happened?" he asked, already examining Collins as they carried him inside. While Wilson explained, Colton helped Faith dismount, catching her when her legs buckled from exhaustion and pain. "You need looking at too," he insisted, but she shook her head. "Mr. Collins first. I'm just tired and sore." The doctor's wife, a kind-faced woman named Martha, took charge of Faith. "Come, dear. Let's get you cleaned up while Henry sees to the guard, then he'll check you over." Faith looked back at Colton. "Will you stay? Just until we know if Mr. Collins will recover." "I'll stay," he promised, surprised by how reluctant he was to leave her side. After securing Thunder at the livery, Colton joined Wilson and the others at the saloon to report the attack to Sheriff Dawson, a former Texas Ranger with a no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. "Sounds like the Blackwater gang," the sheriff mused, making notes in his ledger. "They've been hitting stage coaches between here and Fort Pierre. First time they've come this far south, though." "They mentioned Rattlesnake Gulch," Colton said. "Something about selling the woman there." The sheriff's expression darkened. "That's bad business." Rattlesnake Gulch is a mining camp about 40 miles north of here. No law, no decency. They've got a trading post there that deals in more than supplies, if you take my meaning. Colton's jaw tightened. They were going to sell her. Likely. The sheriff closed his ledger. "I'll wire the marshal in Yankton. Maybe he can send some deputies to clean out that nest of vipers. In the meantime, we should warn the stage company about the increased danger on that route." When Colton returned to the doctor's office, he found Faith sitting in a chair by Collins's bed. She'd washed and changed into a simple blue dress, probably borrowed from Mrs. Martin. Her copper hair was neatly braided down her back, and someone had treated the cut on her face. "Doctor says he'll live," she reported quietly. "The bullet went clean through, and there's no sign of infection yet." Colton nodded, relieved. "That's good news. How about you? Bruised ribs, a few cuts. Nothing that won't heal, she smiled tiredly. Mrs. Martin has been very kind. She's preparing a room for me at their house tonight. What will you do now? He asked. The next stage to Silver Creek won't come through for 3 days. Faith sighed, rubbing her temples. I'm not sure. My position doesn't officially start for 2 weeks, but I was hoping to use the time to prepare and settle in. Colton hesitated, then said, My ranch is on the way to Silver Creek. You'd be welcome to stay until you're recovered enough to travel, or I could escort you there myself once Collins is stable. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by wariness. That's very generous, Mr. O'Malley, but it's Colton, he interrupted with a small smile. And before you worry about propriety, my housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, lives on the property. She's a formidable chaperone who'd sooner shoot me than let anything improper occur under her roof. That drew a genuine laugh from Faith, though she winced and pressed a hand to her ribs. In that case, I'd be grateful for your hospitality, Colton, but only for a day or two. I don't want to impose. No imposition, he assured her. Besides, after what happened today, it might be safer to travel with company. She nodded, sobering. Do you think those men will come back? Not likely, he said. But the sheriff thinks they're part of a larger gang. It wouldn't hurt to be cautious. Faith's eyes drifted to Collins. I still can't believe they killed Mr. Peterson so callously. He was telling me about his grandchildren just an hour before. Colton saw tears gathering in her eyes and instinctively reached out, covering her hand with his own. Try to rest. Everything looks clearer in the morning light. She turned her hand to squeeze his briefly before pulling away. You're right. Thank you again, Colton, for everything. As he left the doctor's office and made his way to the hotel for the night, Colton couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered life. The woman with copper hair and green eyes had awakened something he thought long buried the desire to protect, to care, perhaps even to love again. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect late September day. Colton woke early and secured a wagon from the livery for Faith's journey to his ranch. He purchased supplies at the general store, including extra ammunition. Better to be over-prepared than caught unaware again. When he arrived at the doctor's house, Faith was already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. She wore the same blue dress as the night before, but her hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the early sunlight like burnished copper. Morning, he called, tipping his hat. How are you feeling? Better, she replied, standing carefully. Mr. Collins is awake and asking for breakfast, which Dr. Martin says is a good sign. That is good news. Colton gestured to the wagon. I've arranged transportation that should be easier on your ribs than horseback. Faith smiled gratefully. You've thought of everything. Mrs. Martin emerged from the house carrying a basket. Some provisions for your journey, she explained, and I've packed Faith's things. After saying their goodbyes and checking once more on Collins, who thanked Colton gruffly for saving his life, they set out for the O'Malley ranch. Thunder trotted alongside the wagon, occasionally snorting his displeasure at the slow pace. Your horse seems impatient, Faith observed, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them. Colton chuckled. He's used to a faster pace, aren't you, boy? Thunder tossed his head as if understanding. He's magnificent, she said. I've never seen a horse so regal. He was a cavalry horse, Colton explained. His rider died at Shiloh. Somehow, Thunder found his way to me during the chaos. We've been together ever since. Faith studied him with those perceptive green eyes. You speak of the war reluctantly. Colton kept his gaze on the horizon. Not many good memories there. My father said the same. She adjusted her shawl against the morning chill. He taught at the university during the war, but he volunteered as a field surgeon whenever the fighting came close. The things he saw haunted him until his dying day. War does that, Colton said simply. It shows you the worst of humanity, but sometimes the best too. They traveled in companionable silence for the next hour, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and pines. A creek wound through the valley ahead, marking the boundary of Colton's property. "There it is," he said, pointing to a modest two-story house nestled against a backdrop of trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and several outbuildings were visible behind it. A corral held about a dozen horses and cattle grazed on the hillside beyond. "It's lovely," Faith said sincerely. "So peaceful." As they approached, a stout woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Winters had been with Colton since he'd established the ranch, hired more for her straight-shooting personality and cooking skills than her limited housekeeping abilities. "You're back early," she called. "And with company, I see." Colton helped Faith down from the wagon, mindful of her injuries. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Faith Caldwell. She was in the stagecoach that was attacked yesterday. Miss Caldwell, this is Mrs. Alina Winters, the finest cook in the territory and my right hand around here." Mrs. Winters's shrewd eyes took in Faith's borrowed dress and bruised face. "Attacked were you? Well, you're safe now. Come inside and sit down before you fall down. You look ready to collapse." Faith smiled at the woman's direct manner. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I appreciate your hospitality." "Hospitality, she says." Mrs. Winters snorted, leading the way inside. "It's common decency, nothing more. Now sit. I've got stew on the stove and bread in the oven." The house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and a few touches that spoke of care curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the sofa, bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. Faith's eyes lit up at the sight of the books. "You're welcome to read anything that catches your interest," Colton said, noticing her gaze. "Thank you. I left most of my books behind when I came west. There was only so much room in my trunk." Mrs. Winters bustled about, serving up bowls of fragrant stew and thick slices of fresh bread. "Eat now, talk later," she instructed. "Nothing puts strength back like a hot meal." The stew was delicious, rich with vegetables and tender beef. Faith ate with surprising appetite for someone so slender, and Colton found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with her. After they'd eaten, Mrs. Winters showed Faith to the guest room upstairs. "It's not fancy, but it's clean," she said. "There's water in the pitcher for washing up, and I've laid out a nightgown that should fit you. It belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Oregon." "You're very kind," Faith said. "I'll only stay a day or two until I'm recovered enough to travel to Silver Creek." Mrs. Winters waved away her concern. "Stay as long as you need. This house could use a feminine touch besides my rough ways." When Mrs. Winters returned downstairs, she fixed Colton with a knowing look. "Pretty little thing, isn't she?" Colton busied himself with his coffee. "She's been through an ordeal, hum. The housekeeper wasn't fooled. And you're just being neighborly, I suppose." "She's the new schoolteacher for Silver Creek," he said defensively. "What was I supposed to do, leave her in town with no acquaintances?" Mrs. Winters softened. "You did right by her, Colton. Just be careful with that heart of yours. You've kept it locked away since Caroline died. It might be rusty from disuse." Colton stared into his coffee. Caroline had been his childhood sweetheart, lost to typhoid fever just months before their wedding. That was 10 years ago, but some days the pain felt as fresh as yesterday. "This isn't about my heart," he insisted. "It's about doing the decent thing, if you say so." Mrs. Winters patted his shoulder as she passed. "But I haven't seen your eyes light up like that since before the war." Colton spent the afternoon tending to the ranch chores, giving Faith time to rest. When he returned to the house before sunset, he found her on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt and reading one of his books. "How are you feeling?" he asked, removing his hat as he approached. She looked up with a smile that transformed her face, making her look younger and carefree. "Much better after some rest. Mrs. Winters insisted I eat again, and then practically ordered me to enjoy the fresh air." "That sounds like her." Colton sat in the chair opposite the swing. "She means well, even if her manner is a bit direct." "I like her," Faith said. "She reminds me of my grandmother, never one to mince words." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western hills. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. "I found your library impressive," Faith said, holding up the leather-bound volume in her hands. "Whitman is an unexpected choice for a rancher." Colton smiled, a bit embarrassed. "My father was a school teacher. He believed education was important, even for a boy who preferred horses to books. And yet here you are with a collection that would make many Eastern libraries envious. Books are good company on winter nights when the snow piles up and there's nothing to do but wait for spring." He nodded at the volume she held. "Do you like Whitman? 'I am large, I contain multitudes,'" she quoted with a small smile. "Yes, I admire his work, though my father considered him scandalously modern." "And what do you think?" Colton asked, genuinely curious. Faith considered the question. "I think truth is often found outside the boundaries of convention. Whitman understands that the human experience is vast and contradictory and beautiful in its complexity." Her eloquence surprised and delighted him. "You'll make a fine teacher, Miss Caldwell." "I hope so," she said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "I've never taught in a frontier school before. The children here will have different needs than those back east." "They'll be lucky to have you," Colton assured her. "Knowledge is valuable anywhere, but especially here where opportunities are limited." Faith studied him with those penetrating green eyes. "You're not what I expected, Colton O'Malley." "Oh, and what did you expect?" "When you came charging in yesterday with your rifle blazing, I thought you were just another rough frontiersman. But you're more complex than that." Colton felt strangely exposed under her gaze. "I'm just a man trying to make my way, same as anyone." "A man who reads Whitman and quotes Shakespeare and risks his life for strangers," she countered softly. "I'd say that's rather exceptional." Before he could respond, a rider appeared at the edge of the property, approaching fast. Colton stood, hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "Are you expecting visitors?" Faith asked, sitting up straight. "No." Colton stepped in front of her, watching the approaching rider. "Stay here." As the rider drew closer, Colton relaxed slightly. It was Samuel Wilson's son, Jacob, a gangly youth of 19. "Mr. O'Malley," he called, reining in his horse. "Pa sent me. There's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Colton asked, walking to meet him. Jacob dismounted, breathing hard. "Those bandits from yesterday. They've been asking about the lady in town, offering money for information about where she went." Colton's blood ran cold. "How many?" "6 of them, including the one you wounded. He's got his arm in a sling, but he seems the most determined to find her." Jacob glanced nervously at Faith, who had risen from the swing. "Pa said to tell you they're staying at the saloon tonight, but they're planning to check all the nearby ranches tomorrow." "Did Sheriff Dawson arrest them?" Colton demanded. Jacob shook his head. "They haven't done anything illegal in town yet. Sheriff says his jurisdiction doesn't cover the stagecoach robbery since it happened outside the county line." "Convenient," Colton muttered. "There's more," Jacob added reluctantly. "They're saying the lady stole something valuable from them. That they were just trying to get it back when you interfered." Faith gasped. That's a lie. I've never seen those men before in my life until they attacked the stagecoach. Colton turned to her. Is there anything in your belongings that might be valuable, anything they might actually be after? She frowned, thinking, just my personal items, some clothing, books, teaching supplies, nothing of value except. Her eyes widened. The strong box. Mr. Collins asked me to safeguard a package inside it when he was wounded. He gave me the key. What's in the package? Colton asked. I don't know. He just said it was important and that he'd promised to deliver it safely to Silver Creek. Jacob shifted nervously. Pa says you should both clear out tonight. Head for Silver Creek or Fort Pierre where there's more law. Colton considered their options. It was 10 miles back to Broken Ridge and nearly 40 to Silver Creek. Traveling at night with Faith still recovering from her injuries wasn't ideal, but staying put might be more dangerous. Thank your father for the warning, Jacob. Tell him we'll be careful. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some coins. For your trouble. After Jacob departed, Colton turned to Faith. We need to see what's in that package. Faith nodded, her face pale. It's in my valise. Mrs. Winters put it in my room. They went inside where Mrs. Winters was already packing food into a sack, having overheard the conversation from the kitchen window. You'll need provisions if you're leaving tonight, she said matter-of-factly. We haven't decided that yet, Colton replied. Faith retrieved a small brass key from her pocket and went upstairs, returning moments later with a wrapped package about the size of a cigar box. She placed it on the table and carefully unwrapped the brown paper and twine. Inside was a wooden box with a simple lock. Faith inserted the key, and the lid sprang open to reveal a velvet pouch and several folded documents. Letters, she said, examining the papers, and property deeds to what looks like mining claims. She opened the pouch and gasped. A dozen uncut diamonds spilled onto the table, glittering even in the lamplight. Well, now we know what they're after, Colton said grimly. Mrs. Winters whistled low. That's a fortune sitting there. Faith carefully examined the documents. These are registered to a Thomas Caldwell of Silver Creek. She looked up, startled. Caldwell, that's my surname. Any relation? Colton asked. She shook her head. Not that I'm aware of. My father was an only child and his father came from Ireland. It must be a coincidence. Or not, Mrs. Winters mused. Mighty strange coincidence. Faith read one of the letters and paled. This is addressed to Faith Caldwell, schoolteacher, Silver Creek, Dakota Territory. Her hands trembled as she continued reading. It's from a Thomas Caldwell, saying he's my father's cousin, and that he's been searching for family since striking it rich. He heard about my teaching appointment and wanted to welcome me to the territory. So the strongbox was always meant for you, Colton realized. But how did those bandits know about it? Faith wondered. And why would they claim I stole from them? Someone must have leaked information about the shipment, Colton reasoned. And they're using the theft accusation to justify searching for you. Mrs. Winters frowned. 6 armed men against the 2 of you isn't good odds. You need to leave tonight while they're still in town. Colton nodded reluctantly. We'll go to Silver Creek. It's farther, but there's a sheriff there I trust. We can travel along Bear Creek to avoid the main trail. Faith carefully replaced everything in the box and rewrapped it. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door. It's not your doing, Colton assured her, but Mrs. Winters is right. We should leave under cover of darkness. Within the hour, they had packed provisions, ammunition, and essential supplies. Colton decided they would take horses instead of the wagon Thunder for him, and a steady mare named Willow for Faith. Moving on horseback would allow them to travel faster and use terrain that wagons couldn't navigate. Mrs. Winters embraced Faith before they departed. You be careful, girl, and you, she fixed Colton with a stern look, You bring her back in one piece when this is all settled." "Yes, madam," he promised, touched by the older woman's concern. They set out under a canopy of stars, the three-quarter moon providing enough light to see the trail. Faith rode well despite her injuries, sitting straight in the saddle with a determined set to her jaw. The wooden box was secured in her saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth for protection. "We'll follow the creek north for about 5 miles, then cut west through the foothills," Colton explained as they rode. "It's rougher terrain but less likely to be watched." Faith nodded, adjusting her hat. Mrs. Winters had insisted she take proper riding clothes, pants, a flannel shirt, and a weathered duster that had belonged to Mrs. Winters's late husband. With her hair tucked under a hat, she could pass for a young man from a distance. They rode in silence for the first hour, alert for any signs of pursuit. The night was alive with sounds: the whisper of wind through grass, the occasional hoot of an owl, the steady rhythm of hooves on soft earth. When they reached the foothills, Colton led them into a dense stand of pines to rest the horses. "You're holding up well," he observed as Faith dismounted stiffly. "Necessity is a powerful motivator," she replied with a wry smile, "though I may not be able to walk tomorrow." Colton handed her a canteen. "We'll stop for a few hours before dawn. There's a line shack about 10 miles ahead where we can rest safely." Faith drank deeply, then asked, "Do you think they'll follow us?" "Depends on how badly they want those diamonds." Colton checked his rifle, a habit from his army days. "But yes, I think they'll try." Faith's expression was troubled in the moonlight filtering through the pines. "I never imagined my new life would begin with a desperate flight from bandits." "The West has a way of confounding expectations," Colton said, "for better or worse." "Mostly better, I think," she said quietly. "Despite everything, I don't regret coming here." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Colton felt that strange shift again, as if the ground beneath him had tilted imperceptibly. There was something about Faith Caldwell that called to him: her courage, her intelligence, her quiet strength in the face of adversity. "We should keep moving," he said, breaking the moment. "Still a long way to go before morning." They continued through the night, picking their way carefully along game trails and dry creek beds. Faith kept pace without complaint, though Colton could tell she was in pain from the rigid set of her shoulders. Dawn found them approaching the line shack, a simple one-room structure used by Colton's ranch hands during the spring roundup. "It's not much," he apologized as they dismounted. "But it's solid and has a stove." "It looks perfect," Faith said sincerely. Colton tended to the horses while Faith gathered kindling for a fire. Within minutes, the stove was lit, casting a warm glow in the small space. There were 2 narrow cots along the walls, a rough-hewn table with benches and shelves stocked with basic supplies. "You rest," Colton said, unrolling his bedroll on the floor. "I'll take the first watch." Faith shook her head. "You've been awake as long as I have. There are 2 cots, use one." "It wouldn't be proper," he protested. She gave him a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. "Colton O'Malley, we're fleeing armed bandits with a fortune in diamonds. I think we can suspend the rules of propriety long enough for you to get some sleep." He chuckled, admitting defeat. "Yes, madam, but I'm still taking first watch. 2 hours, then I'll wake you." Faith relented, too exhausted to argue further. She removed her boots and hat, then stretched out on one of the cots, pulling a blanket over herself. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Colton sat by the window, rifle across his knees, and watched the sunrise paint the landscape in gold and amber. His gaze kept returning to Faith's sleeping form. In repose, the worry lines between her brows smoothed away, making her look younger, vulnerable. A fierce protectiveness welled up in him. He would get her safely to Silver Creek, even if he had to face down every bandit in the territory to do it. 2 hours later, true to his word, he gently woke her. Faith stirred, momentarily disoriented before her eyes focused on his face. "Your turn to rest," she said, sitting up. "What should I watch for? Anything that doesn't belong. Dust from riders, unusual bird movements, smoke." He handed her the rifle. "You know how to use this," she nodded, checking the chamber with practiced ease. "My father believed women should know how to defend themselves. The war made him cautious." Colton raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Wake me if you see or hear anything unusual. Don't try to handle it alone." "I won't play the hero," she promised with a small smile. "That seems to be your role." He settled onto the other cot, more exhausted than he'd realized. Just before sleep claimed him, he murmured, "Not a hero. Just a man who couldn't ride away." Faith watched him fall into deep sleep, his features relaxing from their usual vigilant expression. In slumber, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing the younger man beneath the weathered exterior. She could see traces of the boy he must have been before the war changed him, as it had changed so many. The morning passed quietly. Faith divided her attention between watching the surrounding landscape and studying the documents from the box. The letters revealed that Thomas Caldwell had indeed been searching for family since making his strike in the Black Hills. He'd followed rumors of a Caldwell teaching in Silver Creek and had been delighted to discover Faith's appointment. The final letter expressed his hope that she might consider staying in Silver Creek permanently, perhaps even helping him manage his business interests as he had no children of his own. It was a strange twist of fate that brought her to this territory at this precise moment. Faith had always believed in making her own destiny, but the coincidence was startling. Perhaps her father's cousin represented a new beginning, a chance to build something lasting in this rugged, beautiful land. Her gaze drifted to Colton, still sleeping soundly, another unexpected element in her journey west. She'd resigned herself to a solitary life after her father's death, focused solely on her teaching career. Romance seemed a distant possibility in a frontier town with few eligible bachelors. Yet here was this complex man, educated yet rugged, gentle yet fierce when necessary, who had risked his life for her without hesitation. A movement on the distant hillside snapped her from her reverie. She squinted, trying to make out what had caught her eye. There a flash of metal reflecting sunlight, then gone. Someone was watching the shack. Faith moved quietly to Colton's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. He woke instantly, fully alert. "Someone's on the north ridge," she whispered. "I saw sunlight reflect off something metal." Colton rose silently and moved to the window, keeping to the side to avoid being silhouetted. After a moment of careful observation, he turned to her with a grim expression. "3 riders, maybe more, behind the ridge. They're scouting, trying to determine if we're here." "How did they find us?" Faith asked, gathering their belongings with quiet efficiency. "Probably followed our trail from where we left the main path. I was hoping the rocky terrain would slow them down more." Colton checked his revolver. "We need to leave now. There's a back door that leads to a ravine. If we can reach it unseen, we can circle around and continue west." Faith nodded, quickly repacking the saddlebags while Colton prepared the horses. They worked in practiced silence, as if they'd been partners for years instead of mere days. Just as they were about to lead the horses out the back door, a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there, O'Malley. Send out the woman and the diamonds and we'll let you live." Colton exchanged a glance with Faith. "Looks like we've run out of time for a quiet exit. What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the danger. He considered their options. The ravine offered cover but would slow them down. The open country to the west provided faster travel but no protection. Either way, they'd be vulnerable during the initial escape. "I'll create a distraction," Colton decided. "Draw their fire while you ride for that stand of trees to the southwest. I'll catch up with you there." Faith shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "This isn't a debate, Faith," he said, his voice hardening. "Those men want you and the diamonds. If they get both, you'll disappear into Rattlesnake Gulch and the diamonds will vanish too. Come out now and nobody gets hurt," the voice called again, less patient this time. "You have 1 minute to think it over, then we start shooting." Faith grabbed Colton's arm. "There has to be another way. We can both go through the ravine." "Too slow with both horses," he countered. "They'd catch us before we reached the other end." Determination flashed in her green eyes. "Then I'll create the distraction. I'm smaller, faster, and they won't shoot to kill me. They need me alive if they want information about the diamonds." Colton was already shaking his head. "Absolutely not. I'm not risking." "It's not your decision to make," she interrupted. "It's my life, my diamonds, my responsibility." She softened her tone. "Please, Colton, trust me to do this." He studied her face, seeing the resolve that had impressed him from their first meeting. This wasn't a helpless Eastern lady, but a woman of remarkable courage and resourcefulness. "All right," he conceded reluctantly. "But we do this together. I'll take the front, you take the back. Create confusion like I did at the stagecoach. Then we both ride hard for those trees." "Time's up," shouted the bandit leader. "Last chance to come out peaceful like." Colton moved to the front window, rifle ready. "On my signal, we both fire and then run for the horses." "Ready?" Faith positioned herself at the rear window, her father's revolver steady in her hand. "Ready. Now," Colton shouted, firing through the front window at the ground near the bandits' horses. Faith shot out the back window simultaneously, aiming high to avoid hitting anyone. The startled bandits returned fire wildly as their horses reared and bucked. Colton and Faith dashed for their mounts, leaping into the saddles and spurring them toward the trees Colton had indicated. Bullets whizzed past them, kicking up dirt but finding no targets. Thunder lived up to his name, shooting forward with explosive speed. Willow, though not as fast, maintained a steady gallop that ate up the ground. The bandits scrambled to control their frightened horses, giving Colton and Faith precious seconds to increase their lead. They reached the trees and kept going, pushing deeper into the forest where the bandits' horses would have difficulty following. The terrain grew steeper, forcing them to slow to a trot as they wound through pine and aspen. "They're following," Faith called, glancing back, "but they're having trouble with the slope." "Good," Colton replied. "We'll lose them in the high country. There's a trail ahead that only locals know." They rode steadily upward, the air growing cooler as they climbed. Colton led them through a maze of narrow passages between rock formations, across shallow streams, and through dense underbrush that would hide their tracks. By midday, they'd reached a high meadow ringed by towering pines, with a spectacular view of the valley below. "We'll rest here for a bit," Colton said, dismounting. "The horses need water and we could use some food." Faith slid from the saddle, her legs trembling with exertion and fading adrenaline. "Do you think we lost them?" "For now," he answered, leading the horses to a small spring. "But they'll keep searching. Those diamonds are worth killing for." They shared the food misses. Winters had packed jerky, hard bread, dried apples, and coffee that Colton brewed over a small, nearly smokeless fire. The simple meal tasted better than any fancy restaurant Faith had ever sampled. "How much farther to Silver Creek?" she asked, sipping the strong, bitter coffee. "About 20 miles as the crow flies," Colton replied. "But we'll need to take a longer route to avoid open country. Call it 30 miles total. We can make it by tomorrow afternoon if we push on soon. Faith nodded, massaging her sore muscles. I never imagined teaching would involve quite this much adventure. Colton smiled, the expression transforming his face. The Territorial School Board should pay you extra for hazardous duty. I'll be sure to mention that in my letter of introduction, she laughed, then winced as the movement jarred her bruised ribs. Concern immediately replaced humor in Colton's eyes. You're in pain. It's manageable, she assured him. Just a reminder to breathe shallowly. He rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small tin. Mrs. Winters's arnica salve might help with the bruising. Faith accepted it gratefully but hesitated, glancing down at her borrowed shirt. Colton immediately understood her dilemma. I'll check on the horses, he said, turning away to give her privacy. Call if you need anything. Faith waited until he was a discreet distance away, then unbuttoned the flannel shirt enough to apply the salve to her ribs. The bruises had bloomed into vivid purple and yellow patterns across her pale skin. The salve stung initially, then provided blessed relief as she rubbed it in. As she rebuttoned her shirt, she caught Colton watching her from the corner of his eye. He quickly looked away when he realized she'd noticed, a flush creeping up his neck. The moment was oddly intimate, stirring emotions Faith hadn't expected. We should get moving, he said gruffly, returning to gather their supplies. Still a long way to go. They continued through the afternoon, following game trails and old Indian paths that wound through the wilderness. The landscape was breathtaking, towering pines giving way to grassy clearings, rocky outcroppings offering panoramic views of the territory. Despite the danger pursuing them, Faith found herself captivated by the wild beauty surrounding them. As dusk approached, Colton led them to a sheltered hollow near a small waterfall. The cascading water masked their sounds and would make it difficult for anyone to approach undetected. We'll camp here tonight, he decided. Push on at first light. They made a cold camp, unwilling to risk a fire that might be spotted. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Faith shivered in her light clothing, teeth chattering despite her efforts to hide her discomfort. Colton noticed immediately. Here, he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it around her shoulders. This will help. But you'll be cold, she protested. I'm used to it, he replied, though she noticed he moved closer to her, their shoulders almost touching as they sat against a fallen log. The night sky unfolded above them, a tapestry of stars more brilliant than Faith had ever seen in the east. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, and shooting stars occasionally streaked across the darkness. It's magnificent, she whispered, awed by the spectacle. One of the reasons I stay, Colton admitted. Even after the hardest days, this sky reminds me how small our troubles really are. Faith turned to study his profile in the starlight. What are your other reasons? He considered the question. The freedom, I suppose, the chance to build something that's entirely mine. The knowledge that my success or failure depends on my own efforts. No one to answer to but yourself, Faith nodded, understanding. And the land, he added softly. There's something about this country that gets into your blood, the vastness of it, the challenges, the beauty. It changes you. I can see that already, she said. I've only been here a week, and already Massachusetts seems like another lifetime. Their conversation drifted to their backgrounds. Faith spoke of her childhood in a small college town, where books and learning were valued above all else. Colton shared stories of his Pennsylvania farm, his father's schoolhouse, and the irrevocable changes the war had brought to his family and community. My brother didn't come home, he said, his voice distant with old grief. Neither did my father. The farm went to creditors after my mother passed. There was nothing left to go back to. Faith's hand found his in the darkness. "I'm sorry." He squeezed her fingers gently. "It was a long time ago, but it made coming west easier. No ties, no responsibilities except to myself." "And now," she asked, "do you ever wish for more?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Colton was silent for so long that Faith thought he might not answer. "I used to think I had everything I needed," he finally said. "The ranch, my books, Mrs. Winters's cooking." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Now I'm not so sure." Faith's heart quickened at the implication in his words. Before she could respond, a sound from the forest below made them both freeze. "Horses," Colton whispered, reaching for his rifle. "At least 3, maybe 4. They listened intently. The riders were moving slowly, carefully, as if searching the terrain. "They are persistent," Faith murmured, fear returning. "Stay here," Colton instructed, rising silently. "I'm going to get a better look." He disappeared into the darkness, moving with the silent grace of a hunter. Faith remained motionless, straining to hear over the sound of the waterfall. Minutes stretched endlessly until Colton returned, his expression grim. "It's them. 4 riders, heavily armed. They're searching the area systematically." "Will they find us?" Faith asked, already knowing the answer. Colton nodded reluctantly. "Eventually, yes. This hollow is well hidden, but if they're thorough, they'll discover it by morning." "Then we need to leave now," she said decisively, gathering her belongings. "Not yet," he countered. "Moving at night through unfamiliar terrain is too dangerous. We'd make noise, leave clearer tracks. Our best chance is to rest now and slip away before dawn." Faith wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his plan. They prepared as much as possible for a swift departure, packing their supplies, readying the horses, planning their route. Then they settled down to wait, taking turns keeping watch. During her watch, Faith found herself dwelling on Colton's words from earlier. "Now I'm not so sure." Such a simple phrase, yet it hinted at emotions that mirrored her own growing feelings. In just a few days, this quiet, thoughtful man had appended her carefully laid plans for a solitary, dedicated teaching career. She'd come west, seeking independence and purpose. She hadn't expected to find someone who made her contemplate a different kind of future. When the eastern sky began to lighten, Colton gently touched her shoulder. "Time to go," he whispered. They moved with practiced efficiency, speaking only when necessary. The horses seemed to sense their urgency, remaining calm as they were saddled and led away from the campsite. Colton chose a route that followed the stream for several hundred yards, keeping to the water to hide their tracks. When they finally emerged onto drier ground, he led them up a nearly invisible trail that zigzagged up the steep hillside. "From the ridge, we can see anyone following," he explained quietly. "And there's an old mining road on the other side that leads toward Silver Creek." They had almost reached the top when shouts erupted below them. Looking back, Faith saw 2 riders pointing in their direction. The bandits had found their trail. "Ride," Colton urged, spurring Thunder forward. They crested the ridge and galloped along its spine, fully exposed now but moving too quickly for accurate shots from below. The mining road appeared ahead, a narrow track cutting through the forest. They plunged down it, the horses picking their way skillfully through the rocky descent. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets splintering tree bark nearby. Faith ducked low over Willow's neck, urging the mare to greater speed. Colton dropped back slightly, positioning himself between Faith and their pursuers. "Keep going," he shouted. "Don't stop for anything." The road curved sharply, momentarily shielding them from view. Colton used the opportunity to pull alongside Faith. "There's a fork ahead," he panted. "Take the left path. It leads to an old mine. Hide there. I'll draw them off and circle back." "No," Faith protested. "We stay together." "They're gaining on us," Colton argued. "Two targets are harder to hit than one. Trust me, Faith." The fork appeared before them. With a last desperate look at Colton, Faith guided Willow left while he continued straight ahead. The bandits, following the sound of hoofbeats, pursued Colton. Faith rode hard for another quarter-mile before the path ended at an abandoned mine entrance. She dismounted quickly and led Willow inside the dark opening. The mine shaft extended about 30 feet before ending in a cave-in, providing shelter but no escape route. Faith secured Willow, then crept back to the entrance, listening intently. Distant gunfire echoed through the forest, Colton engaging their pursuers. She clutched her father's revolver, torn between hiding as instructed and rushing to help. The minutes dragged by with agonizing slowness. The gunfire ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that frightened Faith more than the shooting had. Had Colton eluded the bandits, or had they caught him? Her question was answered by approaching hoofbeats. Faith pressed herself against the mine wall, revolver ready. The rider dismounted just outside and she heard a familiar voice. "Faith, are you in there?" "Colton." She rushed outside, nearly colliding with him. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him. "I heard shooting." "I thought I'm all right," he assured her, returning her embrace briefly before pulling back. "But we need to move quickly. I managed to wound one of them and scattered the others, but they'll regroup soon." Faith noticed the torn sleeve of his shirt, stained with blood. "You're hurt." "Just a graze," he dismissed. "I've had worse shaving." They retrieved Willow and set out again, pushing the tired horses as much as they dared. The terrain gradually became less rugged as they descended toward the valley where Silver Creek lay. By mid-afternoon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. "There it is," Colton said with evident relief. "Silver Creek." The town was larger than Broken Ridge, boasting a proper main street with 2-story buildings, a church steeple, and signs of prosperity from the nearby mining operations. As they rode in, dusty and exhausted, curious eyes followed their progress. Colton led them directly to the sheriff's office, a solid brick building at the center of town. Sheriff Taylor, a former Army officer with a reputation for integrity, listened gravely to their story and examined the documents and diamonds. "Thomas Caldwell is a respected citizen here," he confirmed. "Owns the largest mine in the county and half the businesses in town. He'll be relieved to know you've arrived safely, Miss Caldwell." "And the bandits?" Colton asked. "I'll send deputies to patrol the approaches to town," the sheriff promised. "And wire the territorial marshal about the Blackwater gang. With your descriptions, we might finally round them up." After leaving the sheriff's office, they made their way to the Silver Creek Hotel. The manager, upon learning Faith's identity, immediately provided their finest room for her and arranged for a hot bath and fresh clothing to be sent up. "Mr. Caldwell left instructions that you were to be given every courtesy," he explained. "He's been away on business in Denver but should return within the week. In the meantime, the school board is eager to meet you." Faith turned to Colton, suddenly reluctant to part ways. "Will you stay in town tonight?" "I should," he agreed, looking as unwilling to leave as she felt. "The horses need rest, and it would be foolish to start back before we're sure the bandits have been dealt with." The manager arranged a room for Colton as well, and they agreed to meet for dinner after they'd both had a chance to clean up and rest. Later, wearing a borrowed dress that was slightly too large but wonderfully clean, Faith descended to the hotel dining room. Colton was already waiting, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes that made him look more like a businessman than a rancher. His arm was properly bandaged, though he still moved it stiffly. "You clean up nicely, Mr. O'Malley," she teased, taking the seat he held for her. "As do you, Miss Caldwell." His eyes warmed as they took in her appearance. "Though I'll admit I've grown fond of you in trousers and a hat." Faith blushed, remembering how practical the men's clothing had been during their flight. "I'm not sure the school board would approve of such attire for their new teacher." "Their loss," he replied with a small smile. Dinner was a leisurely affair, neither of them in a hurry to end the evening. With the immediate danger past, they found themselves discussing the future Faith's plans for the school, Colton's hopes for expanding his ranch. "Will you stay in Silver Creek now that you've found family here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Faith considered the question. "I signed a contract to teach for 1 year. Beyond that." She met his gaze directly. "I'm not sure where I'll be." "Broken Ridge isn't so far from here," Colton observed. "Just a day's ride in good weather." "Is that so?" Faith asked, her heart quickening. "I might have reason to visit then." "I'd hope so." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Mrs. Winters would be disappointed if you didn't come see her again." Faith smiled, hearing the unspoken message beneath his words. "I wouldn't want to disappoint Mrs. Winters." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several town officials, eager to welcome Faith to Silver Creek. The men practically tripped over themselves to introduce their wives and daughters, each extolling the virtues of the community and the importance of education. Colton withdrew slightly as the crowd grew, content to observe Faith in her element. She handled the attention with grace and genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the school and its students. It was clear she would be an asset to Silver Creek, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. When they finally extricated themselves from the well-wishers, it was late. Colton walked Faith to her room, both of them aware of the watchful eyes of the hotel staff. "Will you leave tomorrow?" Faith asked as they reached her door. "Probably," he admitted reluctantly. "Mrs. Winters will be worried, and I've neglected the ranch too long already." Faith nodded, understanding the responsibilities that called him back but wishing circumstances were different. "I want to thank you, Colton, not just for saving my life but for everything after. I wouldn't have made it here without you." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," he countered, "but you're welcome all the same." They stood in awkward silence, neither wanting to say good night. Finally, Colton took her hand and pressed it gently to his lips. "Good night, Faith. Sleep well." "Good night, Colton." She watched him walk away, a strange emptiness settling in her chest despite her physical safety and the promise of a new beginning in Silver Creek. Morning came too quickly. Faith joined Colton for breakfast, where they were met by a messenger from Thomas Caldwell. Having received word of Faith's arrival, he was cutting his Denver trip short and would return to Silver Creek within 3 days. He requested that she make herself comfortable in his home until then, and a housekeeper would arrive shortly to escort her there. The news brought both excitement and a sense of finality to their time together. After breakfast, they walked to the livery where Thunder and Willow were being cared for. The horses seemed refreshed after a night in comfortable stalls with plenty of feed. "I had the blacksmith check Thunder's shoes," Faith said as Colton examined his stallion. "He said the left front needed attention." Colton raised an eyebrow, touched by her thoughtfulness. "Thank you. Thunder would have complained eventually, but it's better to catch these things early." They fell silent as he saddled Thunder and packed his supplies. Every movement brought them closer to parting, a fact neither seemed eager to acknowledge. "The sheriff says they've spotted the bandits heading north," Faith finally said. "It seems they've given up the pursuit, at least for now." "Good," Colton replied, checking Thunder's cinch. "But be careful anyway. Stay in town, keep the diamonds secure until your cousin returns." I will. She hesitated, then asked, will I see you again? Colton paused in his preparations, turning to face her fully. Do you want to? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Very much. Something lightened in his expression. Then you will. I can find reasons to visit Silver Creek. Supplies, livestock auctions, checking on a certain school teacher's welfare. Faith smiled, her heart lifting. Or I could visit Broken Ridge, to thank Mrs. Winters properly for her hospitality. She'd like that. He stepped closer. So would I. The livery was quiet, the stable boy having discreetly disappeared to give them privacy. Colton reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with gentle reverence. I never expected you, Faith Caldwell, he said softly. Never thought I'd find someone who made me want more than what I have. I came west seeking a new beginning, she replied. I just didn't realize what form it might take. He leaned forward, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. Faith felt something bloom in her chest, hope for a future she hadn't dared imagine until now. When they parted, Colton rested his forehead against hers. This isn't goodbye, he said firmly. It's just until next time. Until next time, she echoed. With visible reluctance, he mounted Thunder. The stallion pranced impatiently, sensing the journey ahead. Colton tipped his hat to her one last time, then rode out of the livery and down the main street of Silver Creek. Faith watched until he disappeared from view, already counting the days until they would meet again. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Thomas Caldwell returned to Silver Creek and welcomed Faith with open arms, instantly recognizable as family with his copper hair and green eyes, though his were faded with age. He was a widower in his 60s who had struck it rich in the Black Hills gold rush 5 years earlier. Your father and I were close as boys, he explained as he showed Faith around his spacious home. But life took us in different directions. When I heard Edward had passed and that his daughter was coming west, well, it seemed like Providence. Faith found herself warming to her cousin immediately. He was intelligent, well-read, and genuinely interested in her ideas for the school. He had already arranged for new books and supplies to be ordered from Chicago, and he offered use of his extensive library for her lessons. The diamonds were to be your welcome gift, he explained, somewhat embarrassed by their extravagance. A nest egg for your future, whatever you decide that might be. It was incredibly generous, Faith said, and nearly got us both killed. Thomas shook his head grimly. The blame lies with me. I was too open about the shipment. Someone in Denver must have overheard and tipped off the Blackwater gang. He patted her hand. But thanks to your courage and your cowboy friend, everything turned out all right. He's not my. Faith began, then stopped, unsure how to define what Colton was to her. Thomas smiled knowingly, but didn't press the matter. Instead, he introduced Faith to Silver Creek society, proudly presenting her as his cousin and the town's new schoolteacher. She was welcomed warmly, though she noticed several mothers with eligible sons were particularly attentive. The schoolhouse exceeded her expectations, a sturdy building with large windows, new desks, a small library, and even a piano donated by Thomas. The 28 students ranged from 6 to 16 years of age, representing a mix of backgrounds from the miners' children to the offspring of merchants and ranchers. Faith threw herself into preparations for the upcoming term, organizing books, developing lessons, and meeting with parents. The work was engaging and exactly what she'd hoped for when accepting the position. Yet in quiet moments, her thoughts inevitably drifted to Colton. True to his word, Sheriff Taylor had increased patrols around town and sent descriptions of the Blackwater gang to law enforcement throughout the territory. 2 weeks after Faith's arrival, News came that territorial marshals had captured 3 members of the gang attempting to rob a bank in Yankton. The leader and 1 other are still at large, the sheriff informed Faith and Thomas. But with their main crew behind bars, they'll likely move on to easier hunting grounds. Thomas insisted on hiring a deputy to escort Faith to and from school each day until all the bandits were apprehended. Though she felt the precaution excessive, Faith agreed for her cousin's peace of mind. As September gave way to October, Faith settled into a comfortable routine. She loved teaching, finding the frontier children eager to learn despite their varied levels of prior education. Many had practical knowledge that surpassed their Eastern counterparts. They could track animals, predict weather changes, and perform complex calculations related to mining or ranching operations in their heads. Every day, she found herself looking for a black stallion among the horses tied outside the businesses along Main Street. Every night, she penned a few more lines in the letter she was writing to Colton, unsure when or how she would deliver it. 3 weeks after his departure, Faith was concluding her lessons for the day when an excited murmur ran through the classroom. She looked up to find Colton O'Malley standing in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her with undisguised admiration. "Children," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "you're dismissed for the day. Remember your readings for tomorrow." The students gathered their books and filed out, many eyeing Colton curiously as they passed. When the last child had gone, Faith crossed the room to where he stood, hardly believing he was really there. "You came," she said simply. "I said I would." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Had some business in town. Thought I'd see how Silver Creek's newest teacher was getting along." "Very well," she replied, unable to stop smiling. "My students are wonderful. My cousin has been incredibly supportive and the town has welcomed me warmly. I'm glad." His expression grew more serious. "I've missed you, Faith, and I've missed you," she gestured to her desk. "I've been writing you a letter. It's quite long now. I keep adding to it, but wasn't sure where to send it." "I'm here now," he said softly. "Tell me yourself." They walked together through town, drawing curious glances and knowing smiles. Faith showed him the school, introduced him to shopkeepers she'd befriended, and finally led him to her cousin's house, where Thomas was waiting to meet the man who had saved his cousin's life. The 2 men sized each other up briefly before Thomas extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Mr. O'Malley, I owe you a debt I can never repay. Please consider my home yours whenever you're in Silver Creek." "Thank you, sir," Colton replied, "but anyone would have done the same." "Faith said you'd say that," Thomas chuckled, "and she also said it wasn't true." Not everyone would face armed bandits for a stranger. Colton's eyes found Faith's across the room. She wasn't a stranger for long. That evening, they dined together at Thomas's table, the conversation flowing easily between current events, books, and gentle teasing. Faith watched the 2 men find common ground despite their different backgrounds and felt a growing sense of rightness, as if pieces of her life were finally falling into place. After dinner, Thomas tactfully retired to his study, giving them privacy in the parlor. Faith played the piano while Colton listened, his expression one of peaceful contentment. "You play beautifully," he said when she finished. "Another talent I didn't know about. My mother insisted on lessons," Faith explained. "She said music was the mark of a cultured mind." She was right. He moved to sit beside her on the piano bench. "I have something for you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Faith unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book of poetry, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. "To replace the one you were reading at the ranch," he explained. "I noticed you seemed reluctant to put it down." Faith traced the embossed cover with her fingertips, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." "There's something else," Colton said, his voice growing serious. "The real reason I came to Silver Creek." Faith looked up, her heart suddenly racing. "I spoke with Thomas earlier today before you returned from school, asked for his blessing." Colton took her hands in his. "Faith, I know we've known each other only a short time. By conventional standards, this is madness. But out here, life moves differently. Dangers are greater, time more precious." "What are you saying, Colton?" she asked, though she already knew. "I'm saying that I love you," he declared simply. "That in the brief time I've known you, you've become as essential to me as water or air. I'm asking if you might consider a future that includes me." Joy bloomed in Faith's chest, bright and overwhelming. "Are you proposing marriage, Mr. O'Malley?" "I am," he confirmed, a smile breaking through his nervousness. "Though I'm making a poor job of it." "I should be on one knee with a ring." Faith silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her feelings into the connection between them. When they parted, both breathless, she said, "Yes, my answer is yes." Relief and happiness transformed his face. "You're sure? Your life here is just beginning." "I wouldn't want to take you away from Colton," she interrupted gently. "Silver Creek is only a day's ride from Broken Ridge, as someone once pointed out to me. I can teach here and still build a life with you. Or perhaps Broken Ridge needs a school teacher of its own." "They do," he admitted. "The town council has been trying to recruit one for months." Faith laughed, delighted by the coincidence. "Then it seems the fates are aligning in our favor." Colton pulled her close again. "I didn't dare hope you'd say yes so readily." "Then you underestimated the depth of my feelings," she said softly. "I've thought of little else but you since we parted." They spent the evening planning their future, where they would live, how Faith would complete her teaching commitment, when they might marry. Thomas joined them later, offering his congratulations and practical support. "The diamonds will serve as your dowry," he insisted when Faith tried to return them. "Consider it my wedding gift to you both." The wedding took place the following spring, after Faith had completed the school year. It was a joyous occasion that brought together the communities of Silver Creek and Broken Ridge. Mrs. Winters, resplendent in a new dress purchased for the occasion, cried openly during the ceremony. "About time that boy found happiness again," she told anyone who would listen. "And he couldn't have chosen better if he'd searched the whole territory." They established their home at Colton's ranch, expanded now with land purchased from a neighbor. Faith divided her time between teaching at the new Broken Ridge school and helping with the ranch. The diamonds from Thomas were invested in cattle, breeding stock, and improvements to the property, transforming the modest homestead into one of the most prosperous in the county. Thomas Caldwell became a frequent visitor, doting on Faith and forming a strong bond with Colton. When winter made travel between Silver Creek and Broken Ridge difficult, he would stay for weeks at a time, enriching their evenings with stories of his adventures in the mining camps and his early days searching for gold. One evening, a year after their wedding, Faith and Colton sat on their porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Faith rested her head on her husband's shoulder, his arm secure around her waist. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "When the stagecoach was attacked, often," he admitted. "It was the day that changed everything for me." Faith smiled, placing his hand over her slightly rounded belly where their first child was growing. "For me, too." They sat in companionable silence as dusk settled over the land they both loved. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a lonesome sound that carried across the prairie. Thunder and willow grazed peacefully in the nearby corral, occasional nickering suggesting their own form of conversation. "No regrets?" Colton asked softly, his fingers entwining with hers. Faith turned to face him, her green eyes reflecting the last light of day. "None. Every step, every decision led me here. How could I regret any of it?" He kissed her then, a gentle affirmation of all they had built together. When they parted, Faith whispered the words that had become a cherished ritual between them. "Until next time," she said, echoing their first farewell. Colton smiled, his heart full. And all the times after that. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, talking of tomorrow's work, their hopes for their child, and the simple joy of building a life together in this wild, beautiful land where their love had begun with a daring rescue and a promise kept. In the years that followed, their family grew to include 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all with their mother's copper hair and their father's steady nature. The Blackwater gang became a distant memory as the territory gradually tamed, though Faith and Colton never forgot the danger that had brought them together. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the children were asleep, they would ride out to the ridge overlooking their expanded property. There, under the vast Dakota sky, they would remember the journey that had led a Boston schoolteacher and a Pennsylvania rancher to find each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances. "You think it was chance?" Faith asked once, as they watched a meteor shower from their favorite spot. "Or something more?" Colton considered the question, his arm secure around his wife's shoulders. "I stopped believing in coincidence the moment I saw you fighting those bandits. Some things are meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem." Faith smiled and leaned into his embrace, perfectly content in the life they had built together. From danger and uncertainty had come love, family, and a happiness neither had dared to imagine before that fateful day when a cowboy faced bandits alone at dusk and said, "If you want her, you'll go through me."